A quiet suburban morning was all it took, a stray envelope among bills and flyers, and suddenly, the perfect veneer of our life cracked open. Hidden within lay a confession of betrayal, a secret so shocking it threatened to upend everything I believed in. My wife, the very embodiment of love and trust, had been entangled in an affair with our neighbor, someone who had once been a friend to our family. In that single, fateful moment, I realized that nothing would ever be the same. I had always considered our small, tight-knit neighborhood a sanctuary, a place where everyone knew your name, and trust was woven into the fabric of everyday life. My wife, Laura, and I had built our marriage on a foundation of shared smiles during evening walks, quiet dinners, and the warmth of community gatherings. The neighbors greeted us like family, and we celebrated each holiday with an ease that felt like destiny. I took comfort in the simplicity and predictability of our lives, never imagining that behind that gentle routine, hidden currents of betrayal might be stirring. It began subtly, with small, almost unnoticeable shifts. I started to observe that Laura's responses to my questions about her day grew increasingly evasive. When I'd casually ask about her errands, she'd mention visiting the local library or a boutique without much detail, an explanation that, at first, seemed perfectly ordinary. Yet, over time, a persistent sense of unease crept in, as if I were missing a crucial piece of a conversation I hadn't heard. The neighbor next door, Mr. Collins, had always been friendly, his well-manicured lawn and warm greetings a fixture of our community. I never imagined that he would one day become the unwitting accomplice in the secret that would tear our life apart. One late afternoon, while the sun was dipping low and painting the sky in dusky hues of orange and pink, I found myself unexpectedly alone at home. Laura had mentioned she needed to meet a friend for a quick errand at a local cafe, a routine occurrence, I assumed. As I lounged in the living room, idly scrolling through my phone, I received a notification from a social media app that I seldom checked. It was a photo of a cheerful couple, and at first glance, the image seemed innocuous. But then I noticed a detail that made my heart sink, a background figure whose face, illuminated by the soft glow of a cafe's neon sign, bore an uncanny resemblance to Mr. Collins. My stomach twisted in an instant. I zoomed in on the photo, my hands trembling as I scrolled through comments that praised the couple's spark and flirtatious charm. A creeping suspicion took hold. I remembered a conversation a few weeks prior, when Laura had mentioned that Mr. Collins had complimented her on her new outfit, a remark that had seemed harmless at the time, but now rang with a sinister double meaning. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. That night, I sat alone in our dimly lit living room, the silence punctuated only by the distant hum of traffic outside. My mind replayed every seemingly trivial moment, the way Laura's phone screen would light up when she received a text, the subtle inflections in her voice when she mentioned Mr. Collins, the manner in which her eyes would linger a moment too long on something she shouldn't have been thinking about. Each recollection was like a piece of a dark puzzle, slowly revealing a picture I had never wanted to see. Driven by an almost compulsive need for answers, I decided to act. I quietly installed a discreet tracking app on Laura's phone, rationalizing that it was merely a precaution, a way to ensure our safety in a neighborhood that, until now, had been my safe haven. I told myself it was just one of those little modern conveniences, nothing more. But as the days passed, the data began to tell a different story. The app revealed a series of locations and timestamps that didn't align with the simple errands Laura had mentioned. Instead, they pointed to a series of visits to a nearby upscale cafe and a quaint, little hotel on the edge of town, places where an ordinary woman like her would have no reason to be, unless there was a secret hidden behind those familiar walls. Each ping of the app was a piercing reminder that my wife was not where she claimed to be. I began meticulously noting the details, the times, the locations, even the duration of her stays. Every entry deepened the mounting dread that I had been living a lie. I felt both the sting of betrayal and a cold, rational clarity that urged me to confront the situation head-on. The evidence was irrefutable, a digital trail of deception that left no room for doubt. I spent long, sleepless nights poring over the data, my heart heavy with the realization that our once flawless life was built on a bed of secrets. The more I uncovered, the more my mind spiraled into a vortex of anger and despair. I questioned every memory, every shared meal, every whispered promise, and wondered how I could have been so blind. The truth was a cruel, unyielding force, and with every new piece of evidence, I felt the foundations of our marriage crumbling beneath me. That evening, as the sky darkened into a velvet canvas and the first stars began to twinkle overhead, I made a decision. I would confront Laura, not with the explosive fury of a heart scorned, but with the cold, deliberate weight of undeniable proof. I began compiling every scrap of data into a digital dossier, carefully organizing screenshots of location logs, annotated timestamps, and even snapshots of social media posts that confirmed my worst suspicions. Each file was a silent testament to the betrayal that had been festering in the shadows of our everyday life. As I reviewed my dossier in the solitude of our study, I felt a profound mix of emotions. I was enraged that the woman I loved had betrayed our sacred trust, yet I also felt a deep, aching sorrow for the life we had shared, a life now tainted by lies. The dossier, once a symbol of my determination to uncover the truth, now stood as a grim reminder of how completely my world had been upended in just 24 hours. I knew that confronting Laura would be the hardest thing I had ever done. The thought of tearing open the delicate fabric of our relationship filled me with both dread and a grim resolve. I rehearsed my words over and over, struggling to balance the raw pain in my heart with the need to remain composed. I had to prepare myself for the moment when I would no longer be able to hide behind silence. Every piece of evidence I had gathered demanded to be seen, to be acknowledged, and to force a reckoning between us, a reckoning that would irrevocably change the course of our lives. Now, as I sit here in the quiet of our study, the soft glow of my computer screen illuminating the pages of my digital dossier, I feel the weight of the truth pressing down on me. The once familiar landscape of our life has become a maze of betrayal, and every detail, every unfulfilled promise, now stands as evidence of a secret I can no longer ignore. With a heavy heart and a mind resolute in its determination to face reality, I know that the next step in this harrowing journey is inevitable. I have reached the point where I can no longer live in the blissful ignorance of a perfect marriage. The digital trail of deception has woven a story of betrayal so intricate that it demands to be confronted. The key to unlocking this painful truth has been in my hands all along, and now I must use it to force a confrontation that will either shatter the remnants of our union or propel me toward a path of painful, but necessary, healing. After setting the trap with that carefully crafted dating profile, the hours that followed were a fevered blend of anticipation, dread, and an unsettling clarity. I had designed the profile to be utterly convincing, an idealized persona meant to evoke genuine interest from unsuspecting matches. I told myself it was a harmless test, a way to peel back the layers of our everyday routine, but nothing could have prepared me for the torrent of messages that flooded in within just 24 hours. At first, the responses were innocuous, cheerful greetings and light banter from several strangers. Yet, one message in particular stood out. It was from a profile with a familiar ring, a username that caught my eye as something I'd seen before in passing. My heart pounded as I dug deeper into the conversation, and slowly, the dam of my worst fears began to break. The messages were not mere flirtations, they were detailed, intimate exchanges that suggested a secret life I had never known existed. My wife, Laura, had been actively engaging with this person, using the dating profile as a gateway to reveal more than she ever intended to share with me. I spent the next several hours in a daze, reading every message with a mix of morbid fascination and heartache. Each notification was a confirmation that the perfect facade I had believed in was nothing more than a carefully maintained lie. The chat was filled with phrases that made my blood run cold, compliments on her beauty that went far beyond what I had ever heard from her, playful flirtations that hinted at rendezvous, and even direct references to meeting in person. What was most painful, however, was the casual arrogance with which she boasted about these encounters in group chats among her friends on the app, a place I had assumed would be a private space. Now, it was a public declaration of betrayal. In the quiet isolation of our study that night, I felt as though the floor had dropped out from under me. I replayed every word, every carefully chosen emoji, and I began to piece together a timeline of deceit. According to the timestamps, the conversation had taken place over the course of a single day. Everything had unraveled in less than 24 hours. I felt betrayed not just by the affair itself but by the sheer audacity with which she flaunted her secret life. The digital confessions that had spilled onto the screen were like shards of glass, each one cutting deeper than the last. Desperate to gather irrefutable evidence, I copied the entire conversation and saved screenshots of every exchange. I created a digital dossier, a meticulously organized archive of the evidence that would, if necessary, speak for itself. Every detail was catalogued, the exact times, the context of each message, even the background of her shared photos. I felt a grim satisfaction in knowing that the truth was now undeniable, yet that satisfaction was tempered by a heavy, sinking sorrow. How could the woman I loved transform into someone so reckless and unfaithful? I began to question every shared memory, every laugh and every secret we had once exchanged. The revelation was a brutal reminder that trust is a fragile thing, easily shattered by a single moment of unguarded truth. During the following morning, as the pale light of dawn crept through our bedroom curtains, I wrestled with a storm of emotions. Outwardly, I maintained the facade of normalcy, smiling, asking about her day as if nothing were wrong. But internally, I was a maelstrom of anger and despair. I began to scrutinize her behavior with new eyes, the way her phone screen would light up with notifications she'd hurriedly hide when I approached, the slight hesitation before she responded to casual questions, and the subtle ways she avoided discussing certain topics. Every gesture, every half-forgotten detail, now carried the weight of betrayal. I recorded these observations in my journal with painstaking detail, each note a silent testimony to the slow unraveling of the life I had believed in. By midday, the digital evidence had crystallized into an undeniable portrait of deceit. The messages painted a picture of Laura as someone living a double life, one that was meticulously compartmentalized and kept hidden behind the veneer of our shared routines. I found myself reeling from the realization that every excuse she had offered, every time she claimed she was at work or out with friends, was a carefully constructed alibi for a secret rendezvous. The thought was as crushing as it was inevitable. The woman I thought I knew was actively engaged in an affair, and she had the audacity to brag about it to others without a shred of remorse. In that moment, a decision crystallized in my mind. I could no longer live in a state of silent torment, balancing on the edge of a truth that was eating away at my very core. I had to confront this betrayal, not impulsively, but with the cold, hard certainty that the evidence demanded. I spent the rest of the day preparing for the confrontation. I organized my digital dossier, printing out key screenshots and compiling them into a single folder. I wrote and rewrote a draft of what I would say, practicing my tone and words until I felt they carried the weight of my resolve without descending into explosive anger. I wanted her to understand that I was not driven by a momentary lapse of fury, but by a deep, unwavering need to reclaim my identity and the trust that had been so callously broken. That evening, as twilight descended over our quiet home, I steeled myself for the inevitable confrontation. The air was thick with tension as I watched Laura move about the house with her usual grace, unaware of the storm that was about to break. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited for the right moment, a moment when the facade of our perfect life would finally be stripped away, exposing the raw, painful truth beneath. Every minute that passed was a torture of uncertainty. I found myself pacing the living room, my mind racing with both anticipation and dread. The digital dossier lay on the coffee table, a silent monument to the betrayal I had uncovered. I replayed the messages in my head, each word a reminder of how everything had fallen apart. I couldn't help but wonder, would she be remorseful? Would she try to explain the inexplicable, or would denial be the only shield she could muster? These questions tormented me as I prepared to confront the woman I once loved. The stage was set for a confrontation that promised to be as painful as it was inevitable, a moment when the delicate balance of our marriage would be forever disrupted by the undeniable evidence of her betrayal. I knew that once I spoke the truth aloud, there would be no retreat from the damage done. Yet, deep within me, a fierce determination began to replace the initial shock. I realized that I could no longer allow the silence of my suspicion to define my life. I needed to face the betrayal head-on, to force the hidden truths into the light, and to begin the painful process of reclaiming my own identity from the ruins of our shared past. Thus, as night fell and the house grew eerily quiet, I resolved to act. The digital trail of deceit had become an indelible record of a life I thought was secure, and now it was time for that record to demand accountability. With my heart heavy and my hands steady despite the inner turmoil, I prepared myself for the confrontation that would soon change everything, knowing that every step I took toward revealing the truth was also a step toward forging a new, though painful, beginning. In the very early hours before dawn, when the world is still shrouded in secrets and the only sound is the quiet beating of a restless heart, I finally stepped into the moment that would forever redefine my existence. The confrontation was inevitable, and as I watched the first pale light creep across our bedroom wall, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Every ounce of evidence I'd meticulously gathered, the screenshots, the time-stamped messages, the digital confessions, was now the weight of undeniable truth. In that brief, electrifying moment, I realized that the perfect facade of our marriage had crumbled to dust, and I was forced to confront the painful reality of my wife's betrayal. I had spent the past 24 hours in a fevered state, oscillating between cold, calculated determination and an overwhelming surge of raw emotion. Creating a fake dating profile had seemed like a harmless experiment, a way to test my suspicions without disrupting the calm rhythm of our daily lives. I had convinced myself it was a bit of fun, a modern parable about trust. But nothing could have prepared me for the deluge of messages, the flirtatious banter, and then, the horrifying discovery that my wife, Emily, had been unfaithful. The digital evidence was irrefutable, the same messages, the same casual boasts, all painting a damning portrait of deception. That night, I had reviewed the evidence alone in the quiet of our study, my mind a storm of disbelief and aching sorrow. I remembered every detail as if engraved in my heart, the way her messages sparkled with careless confidence, the way she had nonchalantly boasted in a group chat about secret trysts. I had reread everything, the digital trail becoming a litany of heartbreak that I could no longer ignore. With trembling hands, I organized it all into a dossier, a record that was as damning as it was necessary. And now, with that dossier clutched tightly in my grasp, I braced myself for the confrontation that I knew would shatter the last vestiges of our shared life. When Emily came home that morning, her eyes betrayed nothing of the turmoil I had witnessed in the dead of night. She greeted me with her usual smile, but as the day progressed, subtle cracks began to show. I could see hesitation in the way she responded to even the simplest questions about her whereabouts. Every time her phone buzzed, her smile faltered for an instant before she quickly masked it. I knew that soon, the truth would force itself into the light, and I had to be ready. After a long, agonizing day spent in the grip of internal torment, I invited her to sit with me at our dining table, a place that had once been filled with laughter and shared dreams, now charged with a silence so heavy it nearly suffocated me. I laid the dossier on the table before her. The printed screenshots, the carefully annotated timeline of her secret outings, all were arranged in meticulous order, a digital testament to a betrayal that had been concealed behind every excuse. "Emily," I said, my voice quiet but steady, "we need to talk." I forced myself to meet her gaze, even as I felt my heart splintering inside. There was a long pause, a silence that stretched out like a void. Finally, she glanced at the evidence, her eyes widening in shock and disbelief. For a few long moments, no words came from her. I could see tears glistening at the corners of her eyes, and I felt a cold, profound sadness mix with the anger that still burned within me. I never meant for you to find out this way," she murmured, her voice trembling as if she were trying to gather the scattered pieces of her composure. But there was no escaping the truth laid bare before us. I pressed on, my voice barely rising above a whisper, "Then explain this, Emily. Explain why our life together was built on lies." I let the words hang in the air, heavy with unspoken accusations and the weight of shattered trust. Her eyes darted away, and for a long, agonizing minute, she did nothing but stare blankly at the table. When she finally spoke, it was in a soft, broken tone that barely carried, "It just happened. I was lonely. I felt like you were never really here." Her words tumbled out in a rush, and I could sense that every excuse, every half-remembered justification, was laced with regret and desperation. I listened, numb, as she tried to rationalize the unthinkable, how a marriage I had cherished could be dismantled by moments of impulsive betrayal. The confrontation spiraled into a torrent of emotion. I demanded to know how long this had been going on, whether she had ever been honest about her whereabouts, and what drove her to betray the life we had built together. Each question was met with silence, broken only by intermittent sobs and a series of halting answers that left me with more questions than resolutions. I recalled every subtle sign I had once dismissed, the late returns, the unexplained absences, the evasive answers, and realized that I had been blind to the slow decay of trust. As the discussion wore on, my initial fury gave way to a profound sense of loss. I was not only confronting a wife I thought I knew but also mourning the disintegration of a future that had once been so full of promise. My emotions churned within me, a blend of anger, sorrow, and a haunting numbness that left me feeling both empty and enraged. The room was thick with unspoken words, with every heartbeat echoing the reality that our marriage was irrevocably broken. After that excruciating evening, the fallout was swift and painful. News of the confrontation spread quietly at first, whispers at family gatherings, furtive glances at community events, and the heavy silence that now hung over our shared spaces. My friends and family, who had always revered our seemingly perfect union, now looked at us with a mixture of pity and disillusionment. I became a reluctant emblem of betrayal, a living reminder that even the most cherished bonds could be shattered by hidden truths. In the days that followed, I withdrew into solitude. I spent long, sleepless nights in our study, poring over the evidence and my journal entries, trying to piece together the moments that had led us to this abyss. Every corner of our home was haunted by memories of a happier past, the soft glow of our living room, the gentle murmur of conversation that once filled the air, the warmth of shared laughter that now seemed like echoes of a distant dream. I questioned every memory, every gesture of affection, and wondered how I had been so utterly deceived by the person I loved. I began to seek solace in therapy, a safe space where I could confront the raw, unfiltered truth of my pain. My counselor listened patiently as I recounted every detail of the confrontation, the evidence, and the slow, agonizing unraveling of our marriage. Through our sessions, I slowly learned that the path to healing was not paved by endless retribution, but by the difficult, gradual process of accepting the truth and reclaiming my identity from the ruins of betrayal. True healing, she would say softly, is not about forgetting the past, but about integrating it into who you are and then choosing to live for yourself. Her words, gentle and persistent, offered a fragile lifeline amid the darkness. As the weeks turned into months, I began to rebuild my life piece by painful piece. I reconnected with old friends who had always seen me for who I truly was, not just as part of a seemingly perfect couple. Their steady support helped me to see that my worth was not defined solely by the betrayal I had endured. I took long walks through quiet parks at dawn, letting the fresh air and the soft rustle of leaves remind me that every day was a new chance to rebuild, to reclaim a sense of self that had been obscured by lies. I also returned to my long-neglected passion for writing. I began crafting essays and poems that poured out the raw emotions of that tumultuous period, words that were as painful as they were cathartic. Each line was a step toward understanding, a way to process the anger, the grief, and the disillusionment. My writing became a mirror, reflecting back not just the pain of betrayal, but also the quiet strength that had emerged from it. I realized that while the evidence of her infidelity had shattered the perfect image of our marriage, it had also forced me to confront my own vulnerabilities and to rediscover parts of myself that I had long neglected. There were days when the memory of that fateful confrontation would return with an almost physical ache, a reminder of how everything I had once believed in had been stripped away in a single, devastating moment. I would find myself lost in thought, replaying the images of the incriminating messages, the cold, unyielding evidence of our broken trust. But slowly, as I allowed myself to feel the full spectrum of my emotions, I began to understand that healing was a process, a journey that, while fraught with pain, was also filled with the possibility of renewal. One crisp spring afternoon, I attended a local community event, a modest gathering of friends and neighbors, where I sensed the undercurrent of whispers about my personal tragedy. In that setting, surrounded by people who had witnessed the fall of a once perfect union, I found a bittersweet comfort in the shared understanding that betrayal is a human experience. I listened to stories of others who had faced similar wounds, and in their voices, I recognized a universal truth. Even when our most cherished bonds are broken, there is always a path to rebuilding, a way to transform despair into hope. Over time, I began to let go of the need for public vindication. The dossier of evidence, once a symbol of my relentless pursuit of truth, was slowly archived away, not as a trophy of revenge, but as a record of a chapter that had forever altered my life. I realized that true healing was not found in the destruction of the past, but in the quiet acceptance of its lessons. I learned that forgiveness, though not an easy pill to swallow, was essential for my own liberation. Forgiving did not mean forgetting. It meant releasing the grip of unending anger and allowing myself the space to rebuild. Now, as I sit by the window watching the soft hues of another sunrise, I reflect on the journey that brought me here. The public exposure of my wife's betrayal, caught within 24 hours by a fake dating profile, had upended the life I once knew. It had shattered the comforting illusion of a perfect marriage and forced me into a confrontation with the raw, unvarnished truth. Yet, in that crucible of pain, I discovered a resilience I never knew I possessed. I learned that even when the foundations of your life are torn apart by deceit, you have the power to rebuild from the ruins. I now move forward with cautious optimism, armed with the lessons of my past and a quiet determination to reclaim my identity. The scars of betrayal will always be a part of me, but they no longer define my future. Instead, they serve as a testament to my strength, a reminder that even in the face of the most shattering truth, the human spirit can rise, rebuild, and find hope in the promise of a new day. This is not the end of my story, but a turning point, a rebirth forged in the fires of heartbreak and tempered by the steady light of truth. I choose to believe that while my marriage is forever changed, I am not defeated. I have learned to face the darkness, to embrace the pain, and to use it as a stepping stone toward a life of authenticity and self-respect. With each new sunrise, I take a step forward on a long, uncertain road toward healing, a road where forgiveness, resilience, and the quiet strength of the human spirit guide me toward a future filled with possibility. And so, as I close this chapter of betrayal and step into the delicate light of a new beginning, I hold on to the belief that even when the perfect illusion crumbles, the truth remains, powerful, liberating, and ultimately, the foundation upon which a stronger, more honest life can be built.